America at this time. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you a heads up that this next PowerPoint, a lot of it should sound really familiar to you because it's going into like the people and like religions and areas at this time geographically and everything. And so you might not even have to write anything down for all of this, but if you struggled with that previously, then this is like a great time to kind of review that. So, Washington's America. In 1789, Americans are going to identify themselves, then group themselves according to all kinds of factors, including things like race, sex, class, ethnicity, religion, and then of course geographical features. However, this, as much as it classifies people by this, they also divide themselves by these issues as well. And so this is going to test that assumption. Can one government really represent and govern America that is so diverse? So let's look at the different regions. We first have the New England region that is very uniform at this time. They largely had kind of shut themselves off from outsiders, and so we get things like Puritan notions of religious liberty are prevailing in the region. Partly geography helps with this because the poor soil and long winters here make it impractical to cultivate like cash crops like tobacco or rice that you see in other regions. And so there's very little need for indentured servants or for anyone to be enslaved. They are really the most religiously and ethnically uniform region in the entirety of the United States. Generally, they are going to be descendants of the English immigrants. In fact, only 3% of the population was Black or Native American. Generally, they found the institution of slavery as being incompatible with the whole natural rights philosophy, and therefore we're going to see slavery be outlawed here. But really, the enslavement of people had always been marginal to the economy in New England anyway, so it's a lot easier to outlaw it when you never quite depended on it. We do see women outnumbering men in this region generally, though generally they are also going to remain subordinate to men. Though some are starting to question male power, and they start getting more rights in like the form of education, partly going into that whole Republican motherhood that they must, pass on the virtuous ideals of being a good Republican constituent within the United States to their sons. We're also going to see some things like, more liberalized divorce laws, making it legal to separate from an abusive or unfaithful spouse. Overall, we're also going to see New England is pretty similar politically. They generally favored a stronger government, so you're going to see more federalists in this region, because they saw the government as having the moral responsibility to intervene in people's lives. So New Englanders generally taxed themselves at rates like 2 to 4 times as high as the rest of the country, and their courts were a lot more likely to punish crimes against public order or like sexual misconduct. Then you go a little bit south from there and you get the pluralism of the Mid-Atlantic region. So these were previously our middle colonies. So now we're looking at it as the Mid-Atlantic region. So this is like New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. This is actually the most ethnically and religiously diverse region of the nation. In fact, those of English descent make up less than 40% of the population. Remember, also, like freedom of worship had attracted a lot of settlers into these regions, so it's not really that surprising that it's really diverse. Economic opportunities are going to be better here than in New England. They generally would grow surpluses of like wheat, flour, and corn, and because of this, they're going to have like much more commercial agriculture to feed the urban growth areas. And create just a demand for labor in rural and urban areas. A lot of immigrants feed this demand, but they do also import Africans who had been enslaved. Generally, though, Africans, whether they were enslaved or free, tended to live in maritime cities. They were never economically vital to the entire I should say really that the enslavement of people was never economically vital in this region, though, and so you do see generally a gradual emancipation, though some did also self-emancipate by, running away or pressure their owners to accept cash payments and everything. There's also still racism, so don't think just because there are some free black people that goes away. Diversity also means just a complex political environment. All kinds of competing cultural and economic interests are preventing some sort of broad consensus on what is the true meaning of republicanism. So you have lots of people coming from the strong government perspective versus the weak government perspective. Those who favored a strong government generally were like mercantile interests, financial leaders, they might own commercial farms, and those who were more for an egalitarian republicanism tended to be more middle or lower classes. A lot of times they were subsistence farmers in the back country or day laborers in cities. They also really wanted to resist government aid to businesses because they saw that as like political corruption, because they felt like government aid to businesses was unfairly enriching those who were actually already economically powerful, because you would only establish a business if you already had the money to, was the idea behind that. Then we go further south. Now, before we broke this into two regions, now we're going to just combine the Chesapeake colonies with the southern colonies, and we're just going to call it, the slave South. So this is that region from Maryland and Delaware all the way down to Georgia. The climate and the social conditions are going to favor cash crops or staple crops for world markets. But these crops generally needed back-breaking labor, and so because of that, they are going to be heavily reliant on enslaved people. Most indentured servants would avoid this kind of work as well, meaning that very much the institution of enslaving people, the institution of slavery, is going to be vastly important and economically important to this region. In fact, it's like just under 40% of Southerners are those who are enslaved, though the concentration varies between different regions. You also have the richest men in the country are going to live here in the South. We also do see a free black population had grown like in the 1780s with the aftermath of the entire, American Revolution and everything like that. And there were like laws that were passed making it more financially easier for masters to free those that had been enslaved under them. But there's really no foundation this is the foundation for the Southern economy. And white people feared competition from freed black people. And so there is no program of emancipation like across the board. You are going to see kind of another divide economically between the poverty of the backcountry versus the wealth of the low country. Planters would have a lot of money and they'd have these ostentatious displays of wealth. And in fact, to them, liberty really meant the power of white men unchecked by any outside authority, that they had the rule to govern and rule over others. The only check to this was supposed to be that the planters have their own sense of duty or code of conduct befitting a gentleman or a man of honor. That being said, you still have the backcountry farmers who are jealously guarding their own liberties. They saw themselves as being on equal footing with these planters, but planters, of course, saw them very much as beneath them, because planters are going to believe more so in a social hierarchy based off of like wealth and at birth, basically, which would put, the backcountry farmers in a subordinate position. And then the last region, you can't see it on this map as well, but look at those western portions of like Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and unorganized territory would be the growing West. This actually region was rapidly growing faster than anywhere else in America. There's a ton of land-hungry settlers, so they move west. Of course, they're going to meet Indian resistance in like the Ohio Valley region. In the South, generally people are moving west in like to Kentucky and Tennessee more than anywhere else, because actually present day Alabama and Mississippi are going to be overrun with Native American presence, specifically the Creeks, and this is going to block a lot of American expansion. Still, a lot of like young planters are going to move west, kind of seeing this as their opportunity to set up their own plantations in their own right. And so you see this foundation for enslaving people continuing on. It is very much a harsh and cruel life out west. Generally, they'd build these crudely built log cabins. They'd be filthy interiors with, you know, all kinds of bugs and animals living inside of the walls and everything. The Appalachian Mountains also, you have to keep in mind, is a barrier for both social and economic contact with the East. So generally, those who moved out west are going to be more subsistence farmers. They might even squat on the land, so they didn't even own it oftentimes. We are going to see, because of this, like Kentucky is going to actually split from Virginia in 1792 because they saw the distant government in Richmond as intent on robbing them of their life and liberty. And so this is showing kind of that political allegiance of the West is not necessarily the same as back in the East. And it is uncertain, partly because we do have to deal with that a lot of the British military forts had not been abandoned, and there's the Spanish threat, you know, controlling New Orleans and everything, and having these having a relationship with certain natives in these regions. So I ask you this as a part of your journal: if you had to choose somewhere to live in America at this time, where would you choose and why? So where would you want to live, and why would you want to live there? Also, this is just another map so you could kind of see some different maps. So you can kind of see here it breaks up that western region in these states a little bit better, and you can see like Kentucky and Tennessee a lot more clearly.